feel, based upon what I know now, there was what I would call a benign cover-up. Yes, there was. They were concerned about Oswald's connections to the Soviet Union and to Castro. And they were fearful that if the American public were to find this out, they could become so incensed that it could have possibly led to an atomic war.
We have the right to know the truth. If we don't have the truth, everything we build on is a lie. It's like building a building on a false foundation. Sooner or later, it's going to crumble.
I think we must know what happened in November 22, 1963, in order to be a democracy today. And until the truth is told about that day, then we don't know that they're telling the truth today.
Allen Dulles, director of the CIA, until Kennedy fired him, was one of the commissioners responsible for producing the 26-volume Warren Report on the president's assassination. The American media were glowing in their praise of the report, but concluded Lee Harvey Oswald was alone responsible. It was only under closer scrutiny that the superficiality of its findings became clear.
The Warren Commission decided that there were 3 shots fired, and the first shot struck the president in the back, exited his throat, went on to strike Governor Connolly in the back and exited in his right chest, and then went through his right wrist and then wound up embedded in his thigh, and the bullet fell out at Parkland Hospital. The Warren Commission also decided the second shot probably missed, flew off into Dealy Plaza somewhere. And the commission decided that the third shot struck the president in the head and killed him. And that's the official version of what happened. And it's interesting, one of the early researchers pointed out that no witness at any time has ever described the assassination as having happened that way. Only the Warren Commission came up with that interpretation, and it's the single assassin theory.
Mary Woodward was a junior reporter on the Dallas Morning News who had joined the lunchtime crowds in Dealy Plaza to watch the Kennedy motorcade. She was the journalist closest to the tragedy and rushed back to her office to file the story in a state of great consternation.
They first of all took me to the office nurse and had me have a tranquilizer because they thought was somewhat hysterical. I think I was behaving quite rationally under the circumstances. But anyhow, I then sat down and wrote the story immediately and actually had completed the story before the news was absolutely confirmed that he was even dead. So the story was absolutely my own impressions. It was not from anything anyone had said or what I had read or heard. Some things I have often said I would hate to swear before a court of law or before God, but one thing I am totally positive of in my own mind is how many shots there were. And there were 3 shots. The second 2 shots were immediate. It was almost as if one were an echo of the other. They came so quickly. The sound of one did not cease until the second shot. With the second and third shots, I did see the president being hit. I literally saw his head explode. So I felt that the shots had come, as I wrote in my article, from behind me and to my right, which would have been in the direction of the grassy knoll and the railroad overpass.
Because it contradicted the sole assassin theory, Mary's eyewitness account was quickly pulled and her version discounted.
Civic leaders, responsible people, whether it be the mayor, the managing editor of the paper, almost felt it a responsibility to kind of not rock the boat, perhaps. The neat answer was the version that came to be the most widely accepted, that there were 3 shots and they had all come from the school book depository building and they were all fired by Lee Harvey Oswald.
We do know that the FBI, as the official investigative body for the Warren Commission, apparently collected all the possible evidence it could find that indicated Lee Harvey Oswald did it and did it alone. Other evidence that pointed to perhaps other people or other locations for shooters was either ignored or deemed to be mistaken or misinterpreted.
I was interviewed by the FBI, but I did not testify before the Warren Commission. It's my understanding the reason I did not go before the Warren Commission was because in my statement that I thought the shots came from directly behind implied the shots were coming from the grassy knoll. This is something apparently the Warren Commission did not want to hear. They wanted to keep the direction of the assassination in the direction of the school book depository.
On that tragic day in Dallas, the routine protection of the President of the United States was compromised from the very beginning, according to military expert Colonel Fletcher Prouty.
What they call protection of the president is an old skill. I went to Mexico City in 1956 when President Eisenhower went to Mexico City. And by that I mean the security people went there more than a month early to look at every angle of the trip. There are rules and manuals on what we call protection. The Secret Service, that is an organization of limited size, is authorized to call any number of military people. And these are military people who are already trained to augment their forces in a case like this. There's no shortage of people. Ordinarily, a unit of military, I think was called a Special Group Number 113, would have come up from San Antonio, Texas, and would have been deployed all through the streets of Dallas, the important streets of Dallas. That was not done. In fact, the commander was specifically told he wasn't needed. You've all seen the picture of the school book building, you know, where Oswald is supposed to have shot the president. You notice in those pictures there are open windows. If the Secret Service had been there and had done their usual job, none of those windows would have been opened. And had anyone opened one of those windows at that time, they would have been on the radio, they would have had a man in that room immediately, and the window would have been closed. You see, that's protection. That didn't take place. In fact, there were no Secret Service people on the ground around Dealy Plaza that afternoon. They were told they were not needed.
There was further unprofessional conduct concealed at the time. The night before the assassination, most of the presidential bodyguard spent a drunken evening at this notorious Fort Worth nightclub, some staying until 5 a.m. Drinking alcohol while on a tour of duty contravened all Secret Service regulations. It could well explain their failure to react when the deadly shots strafed the presidential car only hours later in what was to be a classic ambush.
Instead of going straight down the street and then to the Trade Mart, he made this 90-degree turn and then another very sharp turn in front of the school book depository building. Now, the Secret Service have rules against that. The rules are that if the car is slowed down below 44 miles an hour, you must then protect it fully in other ways, such as not digressing and going around corners and all that, because when you slowed him around that corner, you opened up field of fire from 3 directions, behind him, to the side, and from in front. And, of course, he was killed right in that position that had been set up by the selection of that route.
To this day, the gruesomeness of Kennedy's killing haunts those who were closest to the president. Riding a few feet from the limousine was Dallas police outrider Bobby Hargis.
There's another motorcycle officer by the name of Buddy Brewer that came up to me and said, "Bob, you have something on your lip." And he tucked his finger like that, and it was a piece of the president's brain and a piece of his skull bone that had hit me on the lip. The watery blood and stuff that came from his wound had splattered my motorcycle and all over my uniform and my helmet and my face.
In the ensuing chaos, police officers at first acted independently, but within minutes their attention was focused on the Texas School Book Depository building and its open windows. All the floors were systematically searched, but the first hard evidence was discovered in the southeast corner of the 6th floor by Dallas Police Detective Luke Mooney.
I immediately saw the area and with some books had been stacked up, and the window was half open. Now, this window was not all the way open. It was only a half pane open. I secured the area and let no one into that particular spot where the sniper's nest was, where I had seen the spent shells, and someone brought the message up that the president was DOA, was deceased. And at that time, you could have heard a pin drop. You talk about touching your heart, it did. And, pardon me. we were standing there talking and trying to reach our composure, and this wasn't brought out in the statement that there was a book there, and she looked over at it, and the was open, and why on this face of this book was about this size was a picture of Christ. And it says, Christ leads the way.
Outside Parkland Hospital, grief overcame the waiting crowd as the president's death was confirmed. The first to break the news was Senator Ralph Yarborough.
I knew he was dead. I'd been around enough violence in my life to know he was a dead man. And the press came up and asked me what had happened. So I said, there's been a deed of horror. An excavator has sunk beneath the waves. I thought that would tell them, in effect, what had happened, without my saying he was dead.
We made valiant and unceasing efforts to resuscitate this man who was mortally wounded. And I think had we taken the opposite attack and said, oh, this man is dead, that even today people would be questioning and telling us stories about mortally wounded people who had been resuscitated when all hope was lost. So instead of taking that approach, we took the approach, let's save this man if we can, and we made what would be commendable, I think, even by today's standards, efforts to resuscitate him.
State authorities wanted to do an autopsy, which is state law in the state of Texas, and the federal people wanted to take it back to Washington, D.C. And there was a lot of pushing, shoving, cursing. We would try to roll the casket out, someone would grab it and try to roll it back towards the trauma room. This went on for quite a while. It was push and shove type thing. Quite a bit of, like I say, obscene language. I had to hold on to the cross on the casket because of the friction that, where people's pulling it back and forwards. And I was scared to death. I was really frightened.
I believe that if Dr. Rose had been allowed to perform the examination here, since his qualifications were impeccable, that much of the early confusion surrounding the wounds and the questions as to the direction and number of shots could have been settled quickly under the capable forensic studies which Dr. Rose would undoubtedly have performed. But we didn't have the opportunity to examine President Kennedy here.
The New York Post gives it 4 stars. The Associated Press calls it splendid. JFK, A Presidency Revealed. Tonight at 8 p.m. only on the History Channel.
Sorry to bother you. Do you know where the on-ramp is?
Introducing the new 2004 Lancers. More standard features than any car in its class and starting under $13,600.
Well, time for a rubbing. Let's go. Oceaneers Club.
We'll be at the beach.
Yeah. Are you going to be okay by yourself?
Oh, yeah. I got a whole list of things I want to do.
With a Disney cruise, they can do the thing.